Yeah, oh, hang on. Sorry. Thank you, Brad. And Michael. So this is just the recording mic. I'm going to have to walk around and project loudly here, so I will try to do that for you. So make sure you can hear me all right. It's the Caltech curse. Something always goes wrong in here. It's the leading technology institute, and the technology rarely works for some reason. Anyway, so today's the last day of my 3-week book tour, and so it's nice to be done. And next month, my wife and I are doing a European book tour for this. So we'll be spreading the good cheer that way. And speaking of which, my book is dedicated to my wife, Jennifer, my immortal beloved. Since she's here, I could thank her. Thank you. I would say it in German, but I hate to show off. So, and not only she inspired me, she saved me from that right cover, which was the original cover that the publisher sent me. The way it works, the publishers know what's absolutely best for titles and covers, and they don't care what you think. And they send you a single cover and go, "We hope you like it." And Jennifer pointed out, your book is not about Adam and Eve and the snake. It's the opposite of that. I went, oh yeah, that's right, yeah. So we ended up with having to struggle a little bit. And she found this terrific image of a Galileo schooling a monk, which is along the lines of the subtitle of the book, Science and Reason Lead Humanity Toward Truth, Justice, and Freedom. So that's kind of where I'm going. The inspiration for the book title, of course, is the great speech by Dr. Martin Luther King at the culmination of his march from Selma to Montgomery. If you've seen the film, Selma, it's quite good. It's quite accurate all the way up till the famous speech that he gives. They could not get the rights to use the speech words in the movie, I'm told, so they made up another speech. It's pretty good, you know, the actor does a great job, but it's not, he doesn't use this line, not how long do we have to go. He has a series of these tropes, how long, not long, because, and then because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. You can watch the film. I would show it to you, but anyway, probably the same issues. But it's on YouTube. It's all over the place. Just type in how long, and it'll pop right up. But he got this quote from a 19th century abolitionist preacher named Theodore Parker, who, on the eve of the American Civil War, when, if anything, pessimism would have been the right perspective, said, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience, and from what I see, I'm sure it bends towards justice." Now that's some real optimism in the teeth of the fact that slavery was still legal and would be for another decade. But the things speed up much faster. Rights revolutions happen faster now than they did before. So this is 5 months after Dr. King's march that the Voting Rights Act in 1965 was passed. Dr. Lyndon Johnson signing it with Dr. King looking on. And so I'll just rifle through a series of graphs from the book. These are the spread of democracies, liberal democracies. I mean, from voting, that's the whole point of a democracy, is that everybody has an active role in the political process. So, but these aren't just any democracies. These are the number of nations scoring 8 or more on the polity scale, polity 4 scale, from 1800 to 2003. So there's, none at the beginning of the graph, and then just a couple. There's a burst after the First World War, a burst after the Second World War, and it really spikes in the 1970s and 80s. The Polity Project rates democracies on a 1 to 10 scale because some democracies are better than others. I mean, some are more transparent than others. Some allow, if you can believe it, a lot of money to influence elections. And so, of course, after African Americans get the right to vote, then women get the right to vote in 1920. This is the graph tracking that. The first places on Earth to allow women to vote were these islands. Pitcairn Island, the very first one. That's the island where the bounty mutineers ended up, in the middle of nowhere. I couldn't figure out why that was first. The only thing I could think of, they probably had 13 people, 7 of them were women, and that's how it happened. And then, the Cook Islands, New Zealand, and then Australia, and then it really takes off again after the First World War, another spike after the Second World War. Switzerland lagging behind in 1971 for a European country. Samoa here is the last in 1990, except for maybe Saudi Arabia. We're sort of hoping in 2015. I did find on Wikipedia the Vatican City, it said never. But I think they don't have any women there, so that's part of the problem amongst others. By the way, if those of you in the back can't see the pointer, it's right there. Okay. So I wrote about this woman, Inez Milholland, who did a march on Washington, D.C. on this white stallion. Can you imagine following her? Can you imagine being the police trying to stop that? That was a full 7 years before the 19th Amendment was passed. So it took a long time. Finally, at long last, here's a page from the book. In 1920, the 19th Amendment, originally drafted by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton in 1878. So that's took a long time. Was passed by a single vote, thanks to 24-year-old Harry T. Byrne. Here he is, a Tennessee legislator who had originally intended to vote against his state ratifying the amendment, which needed ratification of 36 of the then 48 states to pass, but changed his mind because of a note from his mother. There she is. She said, "Dear son, hurrah, and vote for suffrage. Don't keep them in doubt. I noticed some of the speeches against. They were bitter. I've been watching to see how you stood, but have not noticed anything yet. Don't forget to be a good boy and help Mrs. Cat put the rat in ratification." So in the end, then, suffrage for women came down to the vote of one young man influenced by his mom. It was rumored that the anti-suffragettes were so angry at his decision that they chased him from the chamber, forced him to climb out a window of the Capitol and inch along a ledge to safety. Thus, suffrage arrived in the United States kicking and screaming. It's kind of typical how it goes. But since then, there's been much progress. I have lots of charts graphing progress in all the different rights revolutions. So these are just two from after getting the vote, then getting the right to an education, and then the actual taking up of it. So when I was in college in the 70s, there was an 8% gap between men and women who completed a 4-year degree. And now, in the last year, it was a difference in the opposite direction. And as you know, and I think in medical degrees and law degrees and so on, there's more than parity. And then, of course, having an education gives you earning power. So this is the women's earnings as a percentage of men's 25 to 34-year-olds, just when your career is starting to take off, earn some money. 67% in 1980, 93% in 2012. So not equity, not parity yet, but on its way. And we're in the midst of another rights revolution, that is the gay rights and same-sex marriage. This is unfolding before our eyes. It's kind of nice to have that because we can see how it happens, documented fairly clearly. You can see who's against it. You can see who's for it. You can hear the arguments and remember and remind them after they change their mind. So here's progress and attitudes toward homosexuality and gay marriage, different data sets, the General Social Survey, Gallup, Pew, and some others. So this is percentage giving more inclusive response, 1970s to just a few years ago, all in the upward direction. These graphs change pretty much by the week now. Every time Pew or Gallup does one of these polls, the numbers go up more and more. And as you've been watching, the states continue to overturn bans on same-sex marriage almost by the month, and the Supreme Court will vote in June. And that'll probably put an end to the whole thing. And then usually social attitudes lag a few years behind legal changes. So I'm predicting by 2020 to 2025, we'll look back on 2015 and same-sex marriage debates like we now look back at interracial marriage debates. Remember when interracial marriage was a big thing? Yeah, I don't either. I mean, what? Are you serious? Yeah, 4% of Americans in 1959 approved of interracial marriage. Now, they quit asking the question, pollsters quit asking the question in the 1990s because no one was talking about it anymore. Even our president in 2008 said, "I believe marriage is between a man and a woman. I am not in favor of gay marriage." Now, of course, he was campaigning, so you never know. But in 2012, to his credit, he came out and publicly said, "I've just concluded that for me personally, it's important for me to go ahead and affirm that I think same-sex couples should be able to get married." So anyway, here's where the shift came in 2011. those favoring or allowing gays and lesbians to marry, and those opposed it. So that we crossed that border 4 years ago now, and so this will all be over. In countries like Germany, gay rights and same-sex marriage is non-controversial. This is my wife Jennifer's friends. It's no big deal. People don't make a big fuss about it. And by the way, they don't have guns over there either. No one talks about that either. It's really amazing what a different social attitudes countries can have and still be progressive, advanced, and liberal. And here's those who are leading it by generation. The millennials, born 1981 or later, are leading the charge. They're the ones that say, gay, whatever, dude. And us baby boomers, Don, we're sort of dragging behind, but we're getting there. And then the silent generation, those born in 1928 or later, sort of dragging up the rear there. But, that's just kind of typically how it goes for most social changes like that. But this will all be over in a few years, fairly quickly. Of course, there are those who resist and don't believe it. So those most opposed are white evangelical Protestants, black Protestants, mainline Protestants, and Catholics, the religiously unaffiliated, the nuns, the non-religious, the secularists, atheists, agnostics, freethinkers, skeptics, so on, those who do not oppose it, and that's who's leading that revolution. But again, these will all go up, I predict, by 2020, 2025 or so. And then, my other prediction that you've probably heard me make before, they'll then take credit for this. God loves everybody, including gays and lesbians. We always said that. Remember that Episcopalian guy that married? Yeah, that was our guy. Okay, whatever it takes to get things there, all right, fine. But just remember, what the data showed and why the arguments people made on that. So, by the way, I have some good news for those of you who are in favor of both gay marriage and pot legalization. Yeah, I found some biblical support for both, because in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 13, it says, if a man lies with another man, he must be stoned. So judicial torture has been outlawed in all states, including the United States. We do not practice torture, only enhanced interrogation. Still, we don't have to fight the legal battle there. Here are some of the clever ways that people used to torture suspects. You break them on the wheel. You burn them at the stake. You saw them in half from upside down. Impale them through both orifices, or rip their skin off. These were just one of several ways that you could torture people for any number of hundreds and hundreds of crimes. This is all put to an end, first by arguments, just better, rational arguments, which starting to get to the point of the thesis of my book. Jeremy Bentham, the utilitarian, and Cesare Beccaria, the Italian Enlightenment philosopher. The latter one, Beccaria wrote a famous book called An Essay on Crimes and Punishments. There ought to be a fixed proportion between crimes and punishments. In other words, the punishment should fit the crime. So that was a new idea at the time. Instead of, death penalty for everybody, for everything, just adjust it. That's the principle of proportionality, which requires some abstract reasoning. So we're going to see a shift here in the capacity to think abstractly and reason your way to solving social problems rather than moralizing and punishing. Instead of retributive justice, purely restorative justice. How can we restore the harms that are done? Related to that is the decline of capital punishment. These are European countries with capital punishment, almost none, and none carry it out at all. Here's some of the more creative ways of killing somebody else. Capital punishment in a hunter-gatherer tribe. This was from Christopher Boehm's book, The Origins of Morality. It's the earliest example he could find of a group of hunter-gatherers executing somebody else. So you have 10 archers with their bows held up in triumph, and a guy lying there with 10 arrows in his body. So that's not terribly humane compared to, say, the guillotine, which is supposed to be a more humane way of executing people, or firing squad, or old Sparky, the electric chair, which doesn't always work. Or now we practice lethal injection, in which the word botched is almost always used in conjunction with the words lethal injection, which always strikes me as a little weird because the guy is executed. He's dead. It wasn't botched. It worked. what they mean is that it took too long. Went on for hours, which I've never really understood this because I've had pets my whole life, I've had dogs my whole life. I've had to take them to the vet and have them euthanized several. And it's just, it's a 5-minute process. Take them in there, they give them a shot, they fall asleep, they give them a second shot, stops the heart, done. Just take these guys to the vet if you insist on doing this. But this too is going extinct. These are U.S. death sentences by year from 1977. So it goes up because of the crime wave in the 70s and 80s. It goes down after the crime wave collapsed in the late 1990s. These are actual executions carried out in the United States. The number is actually much lower if you take out Texas, Florida, and Ohio, because most states don't execute. I can't remember the last time California executed somebody. Almost all of them die on death row. And that's probably a good thing. The state gets it wrong too often. Now we're up to 312 people that have been exonerated who were on death row by the Innocence Project, so that's one good argument against it. Second, sometimes it's good to have a strong state with a rule of law, but they can get too much power and cause more problems than they're solving. And three, everybody else has eliminated it in Europe, and we're the last Western democracy to have it. So I'm predicting by 2025 to 2030, that'll be gone. There'll be no more executions anywhere in the Western world. The abolition of slavery, these are the legal battles have been won. This is the number of states that, nations that have abolished slavery and criminalized its practice. It still happens in the form of sex trafficking and slave labor, but you don't have to fight. We don't have to fight the argument. The argument's been won. We just have to enforce the laws. The laws are on the books. The problem is corrupt governments, and they don't enforce the laws. Homicides are down. Here's just some of the data from the 1200s to 2000. These are the homicide rates per 100,000. That's how criminologists and police measure these things. So in European countries, it's less than 1 per 100,000 per year. And so it was 100-fold higher in the late Middle Ages. In other words, the chances of you dying violently in Europe were about 100-fold higher then than now. So something happened, something dramatic, something important. Here's some examples of different creative ways to murder somebody else. You could bash their skull open, shoot an arrow through their sternum. These are pictures from a museum in Copenhagen. This poor guy's got an arrow through his skull and, for good measure, a dagger in his chest. What about war? Haven't armed conflicts become worse? Well, so here's a graph. This is many graphs actually, but this is from Steven Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, one of the inspirations for my book. These are percentage of deaths in warfare of a population, comparing prehistoric archaeological sites. So these would be our hunter-gatherer ancestors. These are modern hunter-gatherers and modern horticultural groups, and then modern states, including World War II states, Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, and so on. So the question one question is, where did the most people die? Yes, 20th century is bad. But what are the chances of you, in particular, dying as a member of a population? You're much safer in any modern state, even the worst modern states, than living back in the Paleolithic. For a whole variety of reasons, and that we'll get into. What about the 20th century? Wasn't that the worst century of all? Well, you have to remember the 20th century is 100 years long. 100. So the first 50 were really bad, but something then dramatic happened there. This is again, battle deaths per 100,000 people per year. So just remember that 1 per 100,000 of homicides, or 100 in the Middle Ages, and it was 3 times that during World War II. But now it's in almost the statistical noise. If you take that little portion there and blow it up that last 50 years, that's what it looks like. So these are per 100,000. So in the 50s, it went from in the 20s and teens down into the single digits, a little spike for some of these interstate conflicts and proxy wars between the great powers, and then it's been tapering off ever since. Now it's down back to about the homicide rates in Europe. By the way, this is Max Roser, is a British economist that has a nice website that has hundreds of graphs like this. Including the decline of genocide. So these are Rudy Rummel's estimates of the number of people killed by their own government or a related nearby government. So even the worst, Rwanda, Cambodia, Pakistan, are nothing compared to the huge spikes from earlier in the 20th century. So there's a little bit of progress there. In general, how far is the moral arc bent? Today's conservatives are more liberal than liberals were in the 1950s. Think about that for a second. If you think about someone like Donald Sterling, remember what a big brouhaha that was over his making disparaging remarks about African Americans in private to his mistress, and he has to sell his team and scorn is heaped upon him. Most old guys in the 50s thought like that, and they weren't particularly private about it. Everybody has been shifted over now. We don't tolerate that anymore. In fact, we get to the point where most of us don't even think like that anymore, and he stands out as a rarity of which that we condemn. Or what about Trayvon Martin or Ferguson? Well, just as a little reminder from Max's data set here, these are the number of lynchings from 1880s all the way, well, but they were zero by 1950. It came to an end. I mean, inner city violence and racial tensions were quite high. Still there a little bit, but much better than it was. As I pointed out on the approve or disapprove of marriage between blacks and whites, 4% in '59. I still find this baffling that it's only 87%. I'm not sure who would tell a pollster that, but in any case, maybe there's a few pockets there. What about terrorism? Even terrorism is not the existential threat, I think, that most people think it is. Particularly our government blows it up into a big thing, and maybe it is, maybe it could be. But this political scientist Erica Chenoweth just published a new data set last year in which she collected every campaign for political change, both violent and nonviolent, over the last 3/4 of a century as a percentage of successful campaigns versus non-successful, and found that nonviolent campaigns were twice as successful as violent campaigns, and likewise with partial success, but violent campaigns were 3 times as likely to fail. And you can see where the shift happens in the 50s, and then the nonviolent violent campaigns start to fail more and more. By failure, just did you get any of your goals? When you set out to achieve some political goals and you committed violence to get them, did you get your goals met? And in most cases, no. They can occasionally get a prisoner released by threatening to kill one of our prisoners or whatever, but rarely, not rarely, never have they replaced the government. No state has ever been overturned by a terrorist organization and replaced and set up a new government. And so that's why President Obama calls them ISIL instead of ISIS, because they're not a state. Let's not recognize them as a state. That's the reason for that. One other thing I'm slightly worried about related to that is the Charlie Hebdo mass murders, because I don't want to end up like this guy as a publisher of a magazine, although we don't really deal with Islam. But just to remind us what the problem is, I'm going to give you a little pop quiz here. What did the murderers shout when they killed the staff at Charlie Hebdo? A, Moses rocks. B, Jesus saves. C, Vishnu lives. D, Buddha thrives. E, atheists rule. No, we all know what it was. And okay, so there's this great debate about to what extent we should criticize somebody else's religion, and most liberals tend to say, well, we shouldn't do that. That's why Sam Harris and Bill Maher, collided with the actor Ben Affleck over this because they feel that it's okay to do that. Well, let's criticize or satirize ideas, not people. I think is the place to begin, and identify what the problem is. Not religion per se. That's too broad a category. Most religions are not like this at all. And even saying religious extremists are the problem is not quite right either, because the Jains are religious extremists. They don't kill anything, including bugs. And insects, they'll carefully crawl along a pathway not to squish a little ant or something like that. Okay, that's pretty extreme, but I'm not worried about them showing up at the skeptics' offices. So the problem is violent religious extremists who hold bad ideas that lead to violence, and parts of Sharia law are those that are bad ideas that I think it is fair to target for analysis. This is a new data set that was just published 2 weeks ago. The Global Terrorism Database that tracked 125,000 terrorist attacks from 1970 to 2013. So I just typed in Islam to find every incident that was related to that. And you can really see the spike just in the last 5 years there. So our intuitions seems like there's more and more stories in the news about Islamic terrorists. Well, that's because there are. These are a share of Muslims who support the death penalty for leaving the religion. So these are huge, more than half. in these countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan and Palestinian territory and Egypt and Jordan and so on. And this is how many back Sharia as the official law. This is the medium percentage of Muslims who favor enshrining Sharia. This is from a Pew survey done in 2013 on 38,000 people with in-person interviews. So this is not random internet stuff. It's people with a clipboard asking people in these different countries. So here is, and of course, the stronger your belief is going to be stronger if you think that the creator of the universe handed these rules down. So these are percentage of Muslims who say Sharia is developed by men, that's on this side, versus the revealed Word of God, that's on that side. So again, why do people behave the way they do? Well, they act on their beliefs, and if you really believe that that God handed down these rules, well, then your behavior is going to be more strongly motivated. So that, again, back to what we do here, debunking supernatural, paranormal ideas that have no evidence. That's what we need to do that ultimately. These are just a few others from the Pew poll. Do you favor corporal punishment for crimes like cutting off a thief's hand, that sort of thing, stoning adulterers? Here's what the Berliner Courier said the next day after the Charlie Hebdo. That's no, you will not murder our freedoms. I like the Independent. All the European press was all over this within hours, publishing things like this, or like this cartoon, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We'll just keep it up. Here's the Berliner Zeitung. They just republished the cover. You don't like that? What these covers stand for? All right, here's some more. So the problem here, ultimately, I think, is parts of Islam around the world have not gone through the Enlightenment. It wasn't that long ago. Here's a painting from a French illuminated Bible from the 12th century. These are two Jews kneeling here, about to be beheaded. Beheaded. They were beheading people. What was their crime? The Jews killed Jesus. Well, I thought it was the Romans killed Jesus. In any case, wasn't Jesus Jewish? I mean, none of this makes any sense at all, but in the 12th century, that's the sort of thing that did make sense. Here's some other incorrect beliefs about Jews, that they poison wells, they cause the Black Death, they kill Christians to use blood for matzah. They wrote the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. This was a Russian forgery meant to portray the idea that the Jews were trying to take over the world, that they were the backstabbers that caused the German defeat in World War I, and then, of course, their eugenics program in World War II. That's a display at the Cologne Gestapo Museum of just an example of keeping track of racial data of people, citizens in Cologne, as a way of categorizing them. This was just a bad idea. All of these are stupid ideas that most of it have been debunked now. But again, this is what I call the witch theory of causality. If you believe that women cavorting with demons late at night cause crop failures, bad diseases and plagues and bad weather and so forth, you're either insane or you lived 500 years ago and you put people on trial for believing these sorts of things, or that you believe that they could do these sorts of things. One of the favorites, of course, are the water test. If she sinks and drowns, well, she's innocent. And if she floats, then she's guilty, so we have to then burn her at the stake. I mean, these are just insane ideas. I have a section in the book about this German magistrate who became skeptical that the torturers could actually elicit accurate information by applying physical pain to a suspect. And the two Jesuits who were in charge of this program told him, no, we know exactly what we're doing. We're getting the right information. We got the right person here. It's all good. And so he arranged to take the two Jesuits down to this torture chamber where they had this woman on the rack. And he said to the woman, woman, these two men here I have suspected they are warlocks. What do you say? Torturer, just crank it up just a little bit now. She immediately blurts out, oh yes, I've seen both of them. On the Sabbath, one of them turned to a goat, the other one turned into a dog, and they were doing this and that, and the Jesuit priests are just going, oh my God. So this magistrate wrote a book saying this is nonsense, we should stop doing this, and they did eventually. Okay, so In addition to debunking bad ideas, I think there's been something of an understanding of of the true nature of our human nature, and now shifting more toward the deeper causes of how moral progress happens, starting with this quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn from his great work, The Gulag Archipelago. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, then it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? So it's not that the witch burners were evil. They were just acting like they thought was the right thing to do for the most part. Maybe there were a few psychopaths and sadists that enjoyed it, but the point is that the system was in place based on bad ideas. And so the whole point of having a more rational, reason-based, science-based society is to debunk the bad ideas, incentivize people to act good. That is to say, we have a dual human nature of good and evil based on our sense of fairness and justice that we are born with. That is, we have a propensity to help and hurt, cooperative and competitive, altruistic and greedy. We have our better angels and our inner demons, as Pinker so aptly puts it. I'll give you an example of this from a video clip that I'm going to show you. It's only 20 seconds long. But you'll see these three people standing here on a train platform. I think it is in Europe somewhere. And you'll see something happens, and this guy reaches out and shoves her, and she sort of stumbles back, and this guy tries to grab her, and he misses, and into the pit she goes. So then this guy, he's like, oh my God, and he starts to move like he's going to rescue her, because there could be a train coming. And then all of a sudden, something happens in his brain, and he just turns and goes over and just cold cocks this guy. I mean, it's a beauty. Just smacks him twice. And then you see him kind of stagger around for a minute like, there was something else I was supposed to do. And then you see this sort of awakening like, oh yeah, I got to rescue my friend. And then he does. This guy takes off, and then he pulls her up, and you can see he says something to her like, "Are you okay?" or whatever. And then when she acknowledges that she's okay, then he takes off after this guy. Revenge. So there's this like, I should help this person, but I want to hurt this guy that hurt the person that I'm with, and so on. So here's the video clip here. Down she goes. Boom! And then let's see. Oh, yeah. Helped her up. Are you okay? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go get this bastard right now. So now let's watch it again, but this time, watch this guy. He's like an EMT or something, I don't know what he is, but he sees what happens and he comes running down the platform like, oh yeah, and you think he's going to help this woman. Oh no. No, he takes off after this guy. It's worth watching a second time. Boom. Down she goes. Here he comes. Okay, to the rescue. And now I got to get this guy. So there's that tension there. You have these emotions bubbling up from underneath, and then you have the rational brain trying to decide what to do. The stronger those impulses, the harder that is, helping, hurting. So I make the argument in the book that this is inborn, it's innate, it's part of our nature. You can see it in primates. These are capuchin monkeys whose brains are really tiny. And they're distant from us by, what, Don, 20 million years or something for capuchin monkey? A long distance. And you can see that they have a sense of right and wrong, fair and just, and unfairness and injustice. So this is Franz de Waal's research, and so she's going to hand him a little pebble. Then he hands the pebble back, and he gets a piece of food for this. So they've just been trained that the pebbles are like money, and they can get food by trading them. And so she gives him a cucumber, and they like cucumbers. And then she does the same thing with this little capuchin monkey, but instead of a cucumber, she gives him a grape. And they like grapes better than cucumbers, because who doesn't? And and this one sees that, and he is not happy. So he wants in on the action. So he gives her a pebble, and then you'll see what happens when he gets a cucumber instead. Okay, so he hands her a rock. She hands him a cucumber. He likes that. hands here. The one on the right puts a rock there, and he gets a grape. Oh, yum. And this one sees that. He sees that he got a grape. So she gives him a stone. He hands the stone back. She gives him a cucumber. He tests it. So we're going to do it again. He taps the rock on the hands it to her. Cucumber. Cucumber? No. So now Franz has what he calls the veneer theory of morality, which is not what he believes. The idea that we're just selfish creatures and we have a thin veneer of morality, just the beast is about to come out, and he thinks, no, actually it's much deeper than that. We have a sense of right and wrong. It's really in there. We know what's the right thing to do, what's fair, and so on. And so in a human example of this, so this is another participatory pop quiz. And this one I want you to raise your hands. Have you ever fantasized about killing someone you don't like? Oh, wow, this group. Oh, boy. I hope you like my lecture. Anyway, so this is the research that was conducted by David Buss, the evolutionary psychologist, amongst others, and he collected all that data and published it in The Murder Next Door, Why the Mind is Designed to Kill. The basic argument from the evolutionary psych perspective is that emotions evolve for a reason. Emotions drive organisms to behave in a certain way. The emotion of hunger drives you to seek out food, and so forth. And then the moral emotions are there to resolve conflicts and to make sure things are reasonably fair and just, because if they're not, then you got to do what Christopher Bohm pointed out, where you take the guy behind, shoot him full of arrows if he's acting up. Those were bullies that got that kind of treatment. Free riders, people that took advantage of the system and didn't play nice. All right, here's the results of this study. So this probably won't surprise you that men were more than twice as likely to frequently think about killing somebody. But the women almost caught up on the occasionally thinking about. A guy said he went 80% of the way toward killing a former friend and now a jealous rival. First, I would break every bone in his body, starting with his fingers and toes, slowly making my way to the larger ones. Then I would puncture his lungs and maybe a few organs. Basically give him as much pain as possible before killing him. A woman said she went 60% of the way toward killing an ex-boyfriend who threatened to make public their sex video. By the way, David asked them, well, how would you do it? In a little written essay. So they wrote these elaborate stories. Whoa. She said, I actually did this. I invited him over for dinner, and as he was in the kitchen looking stupid, peeling the carrots to make a salad, I came to him laughing gently so he wouldn't suspect anything. I thought about grabbing a knife quickly and stabbing him in the chest repeatedly until he was dead. I actually did the first thing, but he saw my intentions and ran away. So as Pinker points out in The Better Angels, the problem is not that we don't have enough morality. There's too much morality. In fact, we know from basically police blotters and their data, that about 90% of homicides are moralistic in nature. Rarely does the thief go into the liquor store to knock it off and get some few bucks and kill somebody. They don't want to do that. They just want the money. They hope you're not home when they burgle your house. They don't want to kill you. They just want the money. The homicides come from, he dissed my car, he insulted me, she cheated on me, he took the parking place, he cheated in cards. These are the sorts of things that escalate up into homicidal violence, especially if you have 314 million guns lying around in a country. And alcohol and young men at bars. Not a good combo for these sorts of things. The idea is that it's called self-help justice. The victim deserved to die. I am the judge, jury, and executioner and carrying out the justice right here on the side of the road. And that's why those homicide rates are so much higher in pre-state societies. The whole point of a state is to try to attenuate that. So my argument is that ever since the Enlightenment, scientific revolution and Enlightenment, we've been applying the methods of science to solving these social problems. Like, how do you get homicide rates lower? What do you do? Let's not just moralize about it. Let's treat it as a problem to be solved. And so that's the point of the Leviathan state. So it begins with Thomas Hobbes, who wrote, political scientists consider the most important political treatise ever written, called the Leviathan. The Leviathan is us, the government. It's us. It's the first articulation of a social contract. We are the government. Now, he ends up supporting the monarchy for personal reasons during the English Civil War, but that's neither here nor there. The idea was that by having a state with a monopoly on the legitimate use of force, it decreases incentives for exploitative attack. That is, I'm going to attack you to get what I want, or reduces the need for deterrence and vengeance, like hitting somebody on the railroad track, or replaces self-help justice with criminal justice. People want justice one way or the other. They're going to get it. If they can't get it through the state, they're likely to go down in the middle of the night and get it. This is why crime rates are higher in America, about 8 times higher than in Europe. We're about 8 per 100,000. Europe's about 1 per 100,000. If you take out the inner-city drug-related crime violence, our numbers are more like 2.5 to 3 per 100,000. The reason for that is because the drugs are illegal. So you can't go to the state. If the other crime guy comes into your neighborhood and he's standing on your corner that was your corner, you can't call the police and go, hey, that guy's moving in on my territory. This is not right. You can't do that because the state said it's illegal, so you have to go take care of the business yourself, and that causes homicide rates to go up. So it replaces a culture of honor with the culture of law. In other words, we need a shadow of enforcement looking out after us. As an example of this, these are called public goods experiments that demonstrate something called altruistic punishment or moralistic punishment. So imagine you're one of 4 people sitting at a table. You're a poor, starving student at college, and you need beer money or whatever. And so you can make some money, and the experimenter gives each of you 10 $1 bills in an envelope. And you can make an anonymous contribution to the commons good. So let's say all 4 of you put in 10 bucks. Now I'm going to multiply it by 1.5 and then redistribute it equally amongst all of you. So let's say each 4 of you put in 10 bucks. So we multiply that by 4 times 1.5. That's $60. I divide it equally between the 4 of you. You now have $15. So that's a pretty good little return on investment. Let's play it again. So now you should all, ideally, if we all put 10 bucks in and so on. And but what if somebody goes, you know what, maybe I can just fudge a little bit, maybe I'll put in a few bucks more. Let's say A gives $5 and B, C, and D each give $10. So now the pot is $35, which I multiply by 1.5 and divide 52.5 bucks by 4, so you each get $13.12, but A now has $18.12 because he held back $5. And believe it or not, this is what actually happens. So let's say that happens the first round, and guess how long it is before the other players realize, wait a minute, somebody's getting a grape and I'm only getting a cucumber. So these are research by Fair and Gachter. Here's their data. There's a collapse in contributions to the common good fairly quickly in the course of 6 rounds, unless they add a second condition in which it's no longer anonymous. It's now transparent. We now know who put what in, and we can punish you if we think you were being unfair holding back. All of a sudden, people become very generous, very cooperative, altruistic, pro-social, and nice. In other words, we got to have a set of rules. This is why Justitia has the accoutrements she has. She has, the balance there, balance scale for fairness. She's blindfolded, so she doesn't have a prejudice against somebody, but she has a sword to enforce the rules. So Leviathan state was good, but it can turn into a problem if it becomes an autocracy, like a theocracy or secular dictatorship. So the first to track a data set on the number of people that governments killed their own citizens was Rudy Rummel. Death by Government was the name of his book. And as he pointed out, it's not that all governments are bad. In the 20th century, 3 governments accounted for the vast majority of these democides. And by contrast, he discovered, by looking at the data, that democracy is a method of nonviolence because power kills. So what democracies do is they break up the centers of power and have more checks and balances and transparency. Not perfectly, but better than those other guys do. And one test of this, I have tons of data supporting this, but Bruce Russett and John O'Neill tested the democratic peace theory, as it's called. You've probably heard people like Thomas Friedman talk about the earth is flat, the world is flat, no two democracies ever fight each other. And the moment you say something like that, somebody points out, well, wasn't the American Civil War two democracies? Wasn't the American Revolutionary War two democracies? What about the Falklands and England? What about the two Greek societies and so on? Yes, there's lots of exceptions. So what they did was they crunched the numbers of 2,300 militarized interstates disputes from 1816 to 2001 using that polity project that assigns a score from 1 to 10. And found that when both countries are fully democratic, that is, they score 8 or higher on the polity scale, conflicts between them decrease by 50%. And when the less democratic member of a pair lean toward autocracy, conflicts increase by 100%. This is adjusting for economic factors, for geography. Obviously, you're more likely to fight somebody that's right on an open border with you, or not, like Canada. So as the formula is democracies increase, violence decreases, and you can see the dramatic shift here. And by the late 80s, early 90s, the number of autocracies declined in the world, the number of democracies increased in the world, and the dotted line is the number of wars, interstate and societal, that go down dramatically. So it's true, democracies are less likely to fight. You can see the case most dramatically between North and South Korea. You can see it from space. You can see it in their heights. North Koreans are several inches shorter than South Koreans. The reason is obviously it's money. If you have a per capita GDP of almost $20,000 a year versus barely over $1,000 a year, you can buy a lot of higher quality food with that, along with education and lots of other things. So I'm making a transition here from the way something is, democracies are better than autocracies, to the way it ought to be. We should spread democracies where we can, and we have. There's 118 now in the world. As pointed out in 1800, there were 0. Why is that? Because democracies place more emphasis on individual rights and individual liberty than any other form of governance. And thus they promote the survival and flourishing of sentient beings. So that's my starting point. That's actually, I'm almost at the end of the talk at page 1 of my book. That is, the survival and flourishing of sentient beings is the basis for establishing values and morals. And so determining the conditions by which sentient beings best flourish ought to be the goal of a science of morality. Okay, so first of all, by sentient, I mean emotive, perceptive, sensitive, responsive, conscious, able to feel and suffer. And here I start with Jeremy Bentham's argument for animal rights. He was the first to articulate why we should care about animals. And it isn't, can they think, or can they speak, or any of that. Can they suffer? Because that's the part of the key to morality, is somebody else suffering as a result of our behavior. So as individual sentient beings who perceive, emote, respond, love, feel, and suffer, not populations, races, groups, tribes, states, or nations. In fact, the rights revolutions are about the freedom of individuals, not collectives. Peoples, not groups. In fact, the Bill of Rights is really written to protect you as an individual from being discriminated against as a member of a group. So the point of this is that individual rights, individual natural rights that you get by virtue of being human, and they're yours. And it doesn't matter what group you're at. And again, it's individuals that vote, not races or genders. It's individuals that want to be treated equally, not groups, because it's individual brains that do the feeling and perceiving and sensing and so on. In any case, then I make one final argument along those lines, that the biggest body counts have been racked up in history when people are treated as a member of a group rather than as individuals. And the logic is as follows, and this is the flaw in utilitarianism. You know this thought experiment about the trolley car hurtling down the track, it's going to kill the 5 workers, and you're standing at the track, and if you throw the switch, it'll go down another track and kill 1 worker. If you've never heard of this, you can go online and take it and add to the millions have already done this. Almost everybody says they'd throw the switch. It's a simple moral calculation, sacrifice 1 to save 5. Now, of course, these things always bother me about these thought experiments. Why can't you just yell, "Get up, there's a train coming"? Because in the real world, there's almost always other options you could do, so you're not faced with a Sophie's choice kind of thing like this. Nevertheless, That is the sort of thing that leads to witch hunts and pogroms and genocides and so on, because it's easy to ratchet up from kill 1 to save 5, kill 10 to save 50, kill 1 million to save 5 million, kill 10 million to save 50 million, and before you know it, you've got a Holocaust. That's how it happens. If we could just get rid of those people, our group will be better. Never mind asking the individuals of those people how they feel about this thing we're about to do. In other words, the constitutions of human societies ought to be built on the constitution of human nature. So I finish now with a quote from Martin Luther King about that dual nature. This is from the final sentences of the book. Each of us is two selves. The great burden of life is to always try to keep that higher self in command. And every time that old lower self acts up and tells us to do wrong, let us allow that the higher self to tell us that we were made for the stars, created for the everlasting, born for eternity. Well, of course, Dr. King was a preacher, and I'm not, as you may have noticed. So I like to bring a little more science to that we are, in fact, made from the stars. Our atoms were forged in the interiors of ancient stars that ended their lives in spectacular paroxysms of supernova explosions that dispersed those atoms into space, where they coalesced into new solar systems with planets, life, and sentient beings capable of such sublime knowledge and moral wisdom. We are stardust. We are golden. We are billion-year-old carbon. No, it's not Crosby, Stills, and Nash. It's Joni Mitchell. Actually, it's Harlow Shapley. I tracked that down for my final footnote in the book because the stardust part, and that we're billion-year-old carbon, comes from in the 1930s astronomer named Harlow Shapley who first articulated that. Anyway, it's a beautiful saying. So in other words, in conclusion, morality is something that carbon atoms can embody given a billion years of evolution, the moral arc. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Questions? Tim?
Recently, one was horrified to see the execution by burning of man alive by Islamic State, Syrian pilot. Do you see anything like a spike in violence as the whole group goes out? In other words, when a reactionary group is losing, do you see any trends that they have a sudden burst of?
Yes, so in my chapter on terrorism, as I said, no terrorist group has ever succeeded in overthrowing a state. What happens is they ratchet up the violence to get more and more of their demands met. The media, the press turns bad. People that were in support of the cause early on, because it seemed like a good idea, oh, Che Guevara, wow, what a romantic revolutionary. Then all of a sudden he's murdering people right and left, then he loses support. And that's typically what happens with most terrorist groups. As the amount of tension and finances and support they get starts to drop off, they ratchet up the violence. Or they ratchet up the violence too much, and then almost everybody turns on them. I mean, when Al-Qaeda says, you know what, you guys are crazy, that tells you that they've just gone too far, and that's almost always what happens. Even people that originally in support just turn against them. See up there, yeah.
When that man was helping the woman who was pushed off the platform, when he turned away from the perpetrator and ran to the edge of the platform, realized he was not coming out in a second, his back was to a man who had already showed what he was capable of. He could have been pushed in.
That's a good point, yes.
He turned around,
yes.
realized the threat, and then came back.
That could be, yes. Well, we don't know. It could very well be, yeah. Yeah.
There's a belief that a big drop in the crime rate and the murder rate in this country has come about because of the women's right to choose. In other words, she wasn't forced to have children, particularly male children, and thus the children the women did have, the ones they wanted, so they were brought up there. What is your feeling about that reason for a lot of the decline of crime?
Yeah, so his question is, it's the Freakonomics theory of the decline of violence and crime in the 90s, because when Roe v. Wade was passed in '72, all those unborn children that weren't born didn't grow up to become criminals because they were born of single moms or whatever. Anyway, that paper got a lot of traction when Stephen Levitt first published it, and then in the academic circles where it was pretty much skeptically analyzed. But then he put it in Freakonomics and it got a lot of attention. I think Pinker has the best. He has like a 4-page analysis showing that it's the wrong cohort that the crime rates went down for in terms of who would be committing those crimes of these single moms and so forth. It doesn't work. So, was that?
Lead and gasoline.
Oh, and then the lead and gasoline thing. Yeah, I haven't looked at that carefully. Although most social scientists point out that things like crime have so many factors at work that any one theory that says, I think it's that one thing, is very unlikely to be true. It's probably half a dozen different factors all shifting in one direction at the same time.
Michael, so much of what you said here reminds me of Pinker's place, Angels of Our Better Nature. Where do you diverge from his message?
So a couple things that, first of all, I present, like at the beginning, an argument for why rights are natural rights that is grounded in our biology and our human nature and these propensities we have to help and hurt and good and evil and so forth. Like with Sam's book as well, Moral Landscape, I also liked. But he starts with a moral starting point of the well-being of conscious creatures as just sort of a philosophical starting point. I'm saying we can do better than that. We can actually say this is why we want to survive and flourish. It's in our nature. It's part of who we are. And you can start with you can go even deeper with an evolutionary model. Then I use a public health analogy. So if you agree that that having like flush toilets and sanitation systems and clean streets and things like this, vaccinations, now there's an idea. If you agree that these are good ideas because hundreds of millions of people have been saved, then you agree that applying the methods of science and reason to solving social problems is also good, like gun control. We did a whole issue of Skeptic on gun control, and much to my amazement, most of the research on lowering rates of gun homicide are done by public health scientists. They just treat it like another problem, like a plague, like a disease, like Ebola. Gun violence, Ebola, same thing. Not literally inside the body, but a problem to be solved. And so once you grant that, can you really say, well, I really think that's just a Western tradition that's not really part of human nature. It's just a Western democratic, industrial, whatever you want to call it. The sort of argument you get for our values are different than their values. They think differently from us, and that's okay. They're all equal. Show me a society that would prefer to live under conditions where there's mass starvation and disease and unsanitary streets and things like that. It's not a Western tradition. Everybody would like that. So that's the main thing. And then also, I just do a whole bunch of other stuff I didn't even get to, but the future, where we're going, economic issues like income inequality, things like that. How about over here? Yes? Yep.
Human beings are tribal, would you agree?
Yes, we're tribal, yep.
Yeah. So, can you talk about that in terms of the moral arc? Because tribalism and religion and warfare are revelation.
Right, so part of the, I have a graph in the first chapter of expanding moral sphere. So this is like Peter Singer's idea of the expanding circle, that animals should be included in the circle. What that idea is that who should we count as an honorary member of our group that we don't kill or commit violence against? So it used to be small in our hunter-gatherer days, and anybody in the other tribe should be treated with suspect, which is one reason why homicide rates are higher. As Jared Diamond likes to point out, walking down a pathway in Papua New Guinea, if you see a stranger, you either try to kill him or you run. The idea of what we do, just hi, nice to know you, that's suicidal. Okay, and there's reasons for that, because other people are dangerous, and trust has to be built up over time with exchanges and mutual beneficial exchanges. So the whole point of civil society is to expand the moral sphere to include more and more people. Total strangers that we don't even know, you can trust them because they're living in the same society, they share the same values, we have the same rules and laws, so I can trust that they're not going to do that. And all of a sudden people quit thinking about other people in those kinds of ways.
Do you think we've been doing that?
Yeah, we've been doing. That's what I'm tracking. So, for example, the coming out campaign for gays. And now atheists are Richard Dawkins Foundation wants the coming out campaign. One thing that coming out does is it makes people realize, oh, well, you mean you're like a normal person, and okay, so you're not an evil demon, weird, trying to impose the gay lifestyle on the rest of us and convert everybody to homosexuality, or these are crazy ideas. Just like we no longer think that Jews poison wells or that women cavort with demons. Just exposure to other people expands the sphere. Reading, the reading revolution. The more people read, the higher their literature that they read, the better they are at reading facial expressions. It's brand new research last year. So if you read like Jane Austen novels, you're really good at correctly identifying facial expressions and eye gaze and what people are thinking. Mind reading. So that's another tool. Travel. The more you travel, the more open you are to other cultures and people that are different from you. That's all pushing the moral sphere out further. Pushing against that inner nature we have of like, I'm really not so sure about these people that are different from me. And pretty soon it rewires the brain and you don't even think about that anymore. It's like the interracial marriage. Who even thinks about that anymore? So we just stop thinking about it. Let's go back to there.
Do you think that DNA and small cameras might have something to do with how things have ended up?
Do you mean for like
People knowing they can't get away with
Oh, yeah. So
they used to be able to get away
yeah, I think cameras are good.
I mean, do you think it applies to yours?
Yes. It's too new to track the changes, but I like the idea of body cameras to keep. There's a really funny video. If you're not watching cat videos, this one's really worth watching. Of this guy he's in a big rig truck, and this cop pulls him over, and the cop is really riding him, and he says to him, "By the way, I'm recording this," and the cop says, "Just a moment," and he goes back to his car and he comes back and says, "You have a nice day now, sir." Everything's cool. Sometimes again, the transparency is really good. Everybody knows. So, evil happens in secrecy. So it's not a perfect thing. I mean, the tweeting out the revolution in Egypt, the Arab Spring, it wasn't perfect. It doesn't solve everything, but it helps, I think. Let's go here.
What's our biggest obstacle, in your opinion?
The biggest obstacle would be just our nature. Just again, pushing back against the social changes, our propensity to not age. The older you are, the slower you are to change. Education, those sorts of things. Africa. How do you overcome it? Well, kill the Now, Greg, we have a lot of friends here. People can't change even. Yeah, that's right. They can. It's just slow to change. So take Africa. Something like if you follow the Gates Foundation, they're going to eradicate poverty in Africa within 15 years. They want to have every single person in Africa with a phone or device and internet access in 15 years. I think they can do it. This is it. All of that just sort of builds. Yeah.
You gave predictions as to when the moral arc would be met for certain groups, for example, gay rights. Do you have a prediction for when the moral arc for animal rights would be met, 2100?
Yeah.
And would it be in stages, chimps, cetaceans, elephants first, and then cows, big chimps?
Yes and yes. It's already happening for chimps and dolphins, the cetaceans, the great apes. We just stopped now finally using chimpanzees in medical research and other kinds of research. The ones that are used now will be retired and sent to these little chimp retirement communities or wherever they are in Oklahoma. So that's a start, and laws against, slaughtering dolphins like in that cove, Taiyovi Cove in Japan. Just again, cameras, exposure, there's condemnation against it. All that helps. But eating meat, probably 2100 if it's going to happen at all. The problem is the little poly farms, as they're called, or I call them happy farms, where Babe the pig runs around, has a name, and everybody likes him, and he has a great life until the last day. Those kinds of farms are not enough to feed 7 billion people, and we're heading for 9 or 10 billion. So I think it's going to be, when the population's back down to like 1 or 2 billion by 2100 to 2200. So the best I think we could hope for is like what Temple Grandin argues for, just better treatment. I think the idea of ending the meat trade, ending all meat consumption is about as likely as getting rid of all 314 million guns in America. It's not going to happen. We got to be realistic.
Are you familiar with the work of Stephen Wise?
Yep, Stephen Wise, making legal. Yeah, he's the sort of the legal brains behind the animal rights movement. I forget the name of his book, but
Yeah, and he sued a couple people who are holding chimps captive.
yes. So
That's their,
I don't know if you've watched those hidden camera documentaries of factory farms. It's really you'll be a vegan for at least a couple of days after that. It's pretty gruesome. Yeah.
Michael, despite the fact that you criticize utilitarianism in the Trolley car case, your basic principle about promoting and flourishing of sentient beings is basically a consequentialist, or you might say rule utilitarian principle.
It is pretty close to that. I just back away from pure utilitarianism just in those extreme instances where we're going to sacrifice somebody. So ultimately, that's like the Bill of Rights. These are, again, this is part of the Enlightenment, that there are certain natural rights you have that cannot be taken away. That's it. There they are. We don't care what the utilitarian calculus is. So I guess that's where I stand on that. That ultimately your natural right not to suffer trumps the good of the group. Let's do right here.
You mentioned Christianity violent in the past and how it somehow evolved into a less toxic version of itself. Based on all the data you've seen, do you see that happening for more hardcore things like Islam?
I think so, yes. I mean, most Muslims in Western countries don't believe in Sharia law. Or if they say that they do, they think it should be part of the whole spectrum of legal laws, or they think it should only apply to families, not to other people. So the more Western, the spread of more Western ideas, the better. And well, ISIL took everybody by surprise. So what do I know? If the State Department doesn't know, and that's all they do is track that kind of stuff, it's hard to say. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier Carol Tavris, who has articulated cognitive dissonance. And I'm just curious if you have any take on whether there's more or less cognitive dissonance in parallel with the moral arc, or if you thought about that.
Hadn't really thought of it that way. I'll ask Carol. She'll have a better answer than me. Yeah.
Do you think that morality will ever boil down to an algorithm or something that's calculable?
Well, no, not really, because there's just so many different areas that we're dealing with. I think they're all just slightly different. I don't imagine a scientific algorithm that would give us the answer. Not quite like that. Maybe a utilitarian type calculus, but not quite. I don't think so. All right, let's do a couple more. Right?
Yeah, we all got a laugh when that guy got popped in the face for pushing the lady out of the thing. We saw that as just punishment. But if we're going to, as a society, evaluate what punishments are correct for fitting the crime, it's your little 7-year-old daughter who gets first raped and then murdered. And the person, what's the appropriate punishment for them?
Yeah. Well, if it was mine, I, kill the guy.
Yeah,
of course.
That's my point.
Yeah, of course.
But we can say no death penalty.
Yeah, that's right.
It hasn't happened to us.
Yeah, that's right.
I'd be out there with anything I could find big and heavy or went off with a butt gun, and I'd hunt him down.
Okay, so again, I've been right there with you until I wrote that chapter and changed my mind on the death penalty for, again, those reasons I mentioned, that the state gets it wrong too often. There's too many mistakes, errors that creep in, racism, whatever. Got to get somebody, just get that guy, and then quit looking.
But what is,
so that the errors is a problem.
What is an appropriate punishment for violent crimes? There's always a chance of a mistake with our criminal system. Judges, juries, it's all really quite big.
Well, the life in prison versus the death penalty, that's where we've gone. That's where everybody's going.
So I get to feed that guy
well,
after he kills my daughter.
I got news for you. You're already doing that anyway, because most of them are housed at rates 3 times the cost of housing a population of general prisoners. And they're not put to death anyway. They die of old age. So it's pragmatically cheaper to just put them in the general population for life. And in any case, that opens up the possibility that maybe a mistake was made. So I have a whole chapter on justice, retributive justice, what we're talking about, and restorative justice. How do you restore to the victims or the families. How do you do that? So there's a whole movement on how to do that, starting with just small crimes, burglaries and things like that, and also to try to fix the problem. Why did somebody do this? Why is somebody a pedophile? Why? It'd be good to know, so we can fix the problem rather than just house them for life and don't ever let them out again. For now, don't ever let them out again. But ultimately, a rational system is where we're heading, is to figure out what's wrong with the brain, the biochemistry. So I have an example of Mr. Oft from Adrian Rain's book. It's this mid-40s school teacher, and he becomes a pedophile. He just all of a sudden gets these urges. He has a stepdaughter he's inappropriate with. The wife figures it out, turns him in, and he's about to go to jail, and he gets a psychiatric brain scan. He turns out he's got a tumor in his brain, pressing up in this area related to these feelings. And so they retract the tumor, and he no longer has the urges. A year later, he's back home, everything's fine. And then all of a sudden, he's being inappropriate again. So scan the brain again, tumor grew back, take the tumor out, he's back to normal again. So, in that case, we wouldn't say, well, he's a pedophile. We'd say he's got a brain tumor, he's got a medical condition. Well, what's the difference between, this is Rain's argument, what's the difference between that guy and somebody else we just don't know what the condition is. We don't know what the wiring is. We're just ignorant. So we call them something different, but it doesn't solve the problem. In the long run, that's where we got to go. Better neuroscience, psychology, criminology, all that. Let's take one more here. Okay, right there.
Population is declining in a lot of advanced countries, including China, except for the religious. The Arabs are expected to have a voting majority in France by 2015. Do you see any resolution of this population growth of the religious?
Yeah, the secularists need to have more babies. In general, we know, I'll just speak generally, I can't speak for France, but that the more educated people are, the fewer children they have. The more access to birth control they have, the fewer children they have. Family, particularly women in Africa, for example, the biggest solution is education, prosperity, raise their incomes, which gives them a better education and gives them better access to birth control. Family planning kicks in, family size goes down, overall population goes down. It's already happened dozens of places around the world. It's just a matter of applying it. And religion is one of the big obstacles. Like the Catholic Church really needs to get off this thing about no birth control and the whole abortion thing. I mean, it's just, that's the problem I see. So, anyway, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.